Jerome Caldwell was the kind of pastor people trusted with their deepest secrets. But behind his holy smile hid a man living a double life, torn between his devoted wife Vanessa and his alluring mistress, Renee Harper, a choice that would end in one of Atlanta's most shocking family massacres. Pastor Jerome Caldwell had spent nearly 15 years building what seemed like a flawless life. His congregation adored him. He spoke with conviction that stirred hearts, and his calm, fatherly smile made people believe he was the very embodiment of faith. Every Sunday morning, the church on Auburn Avenue was filled with families eager to hear him preach. He talked about love, forgiveness, and family unity, values that defined his image. His wife, Vanessa Caldwell, was always there in the front pew, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes shining with pride. Together, they represented everything a good Christian marriage should be. Their children, Marcus and Elisa, were well-behaved, polite, and loved by everyone in the congregation. Marcus, at 17, was tall and full of energy. He had dreams of playing college basketball and spent hours practicing after school. His younger sister, Elisa, was 12, a gentle girl who loved to play the piano during youth services. The sound of her music often drifted through the church halls as members cleaned up after evening meetings. To the outside world, the Caldwells were a picture of stability and grace. No one could imagine what darkness was growing behind closed doors. In the privacy of their home, the cracks in their perfect image began to show. Jerome had grown restless, distant from his wife and children. He often stayed late at church, claiming to be preparing for upcoming sermons or counseling troubled parishioners. Vanessa, trusting and devoted, rarely questioned him, but she felt the change. His warmth was gone. Their once meaningful conversations had turned into brief exchanges. She told herself it was the stress of leadership, that her husband was simply overworked. But late at night, when she lay in bed alone, she couldn't ignore the emptiness beside her. Jerome's passion had shifted from his family to someone else. Her name was Renee Harper, the church's choir director. Renee was beautiful, confident, and magnetic. At 32, she was divorced and carried herself with a mix of strength and vulnerability that drew people in. She led the choir with energy that made every hymn sound heavenly. Jerome had noticed her years ago but kept a respectful distance. Over time, that distance vanished. It began with shared smiles during rehearsals, then long conversations about faith and life. Soon, those talks turned into late-night meetings that had nothing to do with religion. The affair gave Jerome a feeling he hadn't experienced in years: youth, excitement, desire. But with that rush came guilt, and the guilt quickly twisted into paranoia. Every Sunday as he stood at the pulpit, he felt his own words stab at his conscience. He preached about honesty while living a lie. He spoke of God's wrath while secretly praying that no one would uncover his sin. Meanwhile, Renee wanted more. She was tired of sneaking around, tired of being the secret lover of a man who spoke about purity every week. Vanessa began to notice small things: his phone always faced down, his scent changed to a new cologne, and his excuses became repetitive. A quiet fear began to grow inside her heart, though she never dared to confront him directly. She still believed in her vows, in the man she had built a life with. But what she didn't know was that the man she loved was slowly slipping away from her, consumed by a secret that would soon destroy everything he once claimed to protect. As spring came to Atlanta, the air inside the Caldwell household grew heavy with silence. Vanessa had stopped pretending not to notice the changes in her husband. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the smell of a woman's perfume that lingered faintly on his shirts. It all formed a picture she didn't want to see. One evening, as she gathered laundry from the back seat of his car, she found the proof that shattered her denial: a small envelope with hotel receipts, lipstick-stained napkins, and a note that simply read, "F. I miss you already." Her hands trembled as she read the name at the bottom. Renee. The realization hit her like a wave. The choir director, the woman who led worship every Sunday with a radiant smile, was sleeping with her husband. Vanessa didn't confront Jerome immediately. She prayed instead, night after night, asking for strength and wisdom. She told herself that God could fix even the most broken hearts, that her husband could be guided back to his faith and family. But the man who returned home every evening was not the man she had married. His eyes no longer met hers, his affection replaced with short answers and weary sighs. He ate in silence, slept in a separate room, and when he did speak, His tone carried a quiet irritation, as if her very presence was an inconvenience. Jerome was torn between two worlds: his family, who symbolized duty and reputation, and Renée, who represented freedom and temptation. Renée's influence over him grew stronger every day. She whispered promises of a new life, a life without judgment or guilt. She told him he didn't belong in a loveless marriage, that he deserved happiness. Her voice echoed in his mind even when she wasn't there. Soon she began to demand more. She was tired of waiting, tired of sneaking around like a secret shame. She wanted him to leave Vanessa, and she wasn't afraid to pressure him into doing it. Friends noticed changes in Renée too. She became erratic, constantly checking her phone, growing jealous whenever Jerome was seen with his family. Some church members even began to whisper about how close the two seemed during rehearsals. The gossip spread quietly through the pews, but no one dared to question the pastor directly. He had too much authority, too much respect. Yet inside, Jerome felt it slipping away. His sermons began to lose their spark, his once strong voice faltered mid-prayer. Members of the church described a different man, tired, irritable, and distant. One Sunday morning, as he looked out over the congregation, Jerome felt the weight of hypocrisy crush him. He could see Vanessa sitting there, her eyes filled with quiet pain, while Renée stood by the choir, her gaze burning into his. The contrast between the two women, the one who represented his past and the one who symbolized his forbidden desire, felt unbearable. That day his sermon was short, his message hollow. Afterward, he locked himself in his office and wept. By summer, Jerome's guilt turned into fear. Renée was threatening to expose the affair if he didn't make a decision soon. She warned that if the church board found out, his career and reputation would be over. Jerome's mind spiraled into chaos. He felt trapped, desperate, and cornered by his own mistakes. In his confusion, his thoughts darkened. He began to imagine a world where his problems simply didn't exist, where the pain, the lies, and the pressure all disappeared. That fantasy would soon evolve into something much darker, something irreversible. The night of August 14th began like any other in the quiet suburb of Pinewood Lane. The Caldwell's two-story brick home looked peaceful from the outside, its porch light glowing softly under the humid Atlanta sky. Neighbors later said they heard faint music from Alyssa's piano drifting through an open window, a familiar sound that usually brought comfort. But that night, the melody stopped abruptly. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Jerome sat alone in his study, his Bible open but unread, a glass of whiskey beside him. On the desk lay his gun, polished and loaded. His mind raced between guilt, anger, and despair. He thought of Renée's voice echoing in his ear, reminding him that freedom was just one decision away. He thought of Vanessa's silent stares, Marcus's cold distance, and Alyssa's innocent questions about why Daddy doesn't smile anymore. It all felt unbearable. Vanessa was upstairs folding laundry when she heard the creak of the floorboards. She assumed Jerome was coming to bed, but when she looked at the clock, it was nearly midnight. She called out to him, but he didn't answer. In the next room, Marcus was watching a late-night basketball recap on his phone, his headphones blocking out the sound of his father's footsteps approaching the hallway. Alyssa was asleep, her piano sheet still resting on the stand beside her. A single gunshot shattered the silence. Then another. Then one more. The neighbors heard faint pops but brushed them off as fireworks from a nearby block. Inside the house, chaos unfolded in seconds. Vanessa barely had time to react before Jerome entered the bedroom, his face pale and eyes distant. By the time the echo faded, she was gone. Marcus, hearing the noise, ran from his room, only to meet his father at the top of the stairs. There was a struggle, a thud, then another gunshot. The young man who dreamed of playing college basketball fell instantly. Downstairs, Alyssa stirred awake to the noise. Frightened, she ran toward the living room, calling for her mother. The sight that met her froze her in place. The piano that had always been her safe place now stood as a silent witness to her final moments. When it was over, Jerome stood in the middle of his home surrounded by the people who had once been his reason to live. The gun hung loosely in his hand. He walked through each room, trembling, unable to process what he had done. On the walls were family photos, birthdays, church picnics, and smiling faces that now felt like ghosts. Hours later, he left the house. The front door was left slightly open, the porch light still on. He drove aimlessly through the quiet streets of Atlanta before abandoning his car near a wooded area outside the city. Inside the vehicle, police would later find his wedding ring, his Bible, and a handwritten note that read, "Allah forgive me, Lord. I couldn't choose." It wasn't until 2 days later that a church member, worried that the Caldwells hadn't answered calls or shown up for Sunday service, contacted the police. When officers entered the home, they were met with a chilling silence. The scene they discovered was one of unimaginable horror, a once perfect family erased in a single night of madness. The pastor who had preached about love and salvation had become the author of his own damnation. The manhunt for Pastor Jerome Caldwell began before sunrise. The gruesome discovery at the Caldwell home sent shockwaves through Atlanta, and the police quickly turned their attention to finding the missing pastor. Within hours, his photo was plastered across television screens, news websites, and social media feeds. "Pastor on the run," the headlines read. The community that once revered him now whispered his name in horror. As detectives pieced together the timeline, one name kept resurfacing: Renee Harper, the church's choir director and the woman rumored to be his lover. Detectives visited Renee's small apartment on the city's south side the next morning. She opened the door with trembling hands, her eyes red from crying. She claimed she had no idea where Jerome was and denied any involvement in the killings. But investigators weren't convinced. In her kitchen trash bin, they found a burned piece of paper that appeared to be part of a handwritten letter from Jerome. It mentioned freedom, new beginnings, and the price of love. It wasn't enough to charge her, but it hinted that she knew more than she was saying. Cell phone records soon revealed a shocking pattern. In the week leading up to the murders, Jerome and Renee exchanged over 100 calls and text messages. The night before the killings, they spoke for nearly 3 hours. Security footage from a gas station near Pinewood Lane showed Jerome's car pulling in, and minutes later Renee's white sedan appearing on camera. The two talked briefly before driving off in opposite directions. That footage was time-stamped less than 5 hours before the massacre. When confronted with this evidence, Renee's composure cracked. She admitted to the affair but claimed she never asked Jerome to harm anyone. According to her statement, Jerome called her early in the morning after the murders, crying and confessing what he had done. He told her, "It's over. They're gone. We can finally be together." But instead of meeting her like he promised, he vanished. Renee insisted she tried to convince him to surrender, but investigators doubted her sincerity. For 6 long days, police combed through parks, abandoned buildings, and wooded trails across Fulton County. Volunteers from the church joined the search, praying they would find Jerome alive and willing to answer for what he had done. But on the 7th day, 2 hikers discovered a body near the banks of the Chattahoochee River. The man was identified as Jerome Caldwell. He had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. His car keys were found in his pocket, along with a crumpled note that read, "I couldn't live with the weight. I loved her too much to live without her." The discovery ended the search, but not the questions. Police soon uncovered more evidence tying Renee to Jerome's unraveling mind. Hidden inside her closet was a box filled with letters, photos, and small keepsakes from their secret relationship. Among them was a draft of a sermon Jerome never delivered, titled, "When Love Demands Too Much." Investigators concluded that Renee's influence, whether intentional or not, had played a significant role in pushing him toward his breaking point. In the eyes of the law, she wasn't the one who pulled the trigger, but her words, her pressure, and her obsession had helped ignite a tragedy that would haunt Atlanta for years. The aftermath of the Caldwell family murders left a scar that would never heal. News outlets called it one of the most disturbing cases in Atlanta's recent history. A pastor who preached about love and forgiveness, but ended his own family's lives in cold blood. For weeks, the story dominated headlines. Church members gathered outside the locked gates of St. Matthew's Baptist Church, leaving flowers, candles, and handwritten notes. Some prayed for the souls of the victims, while others demanded answers, wondering how a man they trusted with their faith could commit something so monstrous. The church that once rang with gospel music and laughter now stood silent, its stained glass windows casting fractured light over empty pews. Vanessa, Marcus, and Alyssa were buried side by side in a quiet cemetery on the outskirts of the city. Hundreds attended the funeral. There were tears, hymns, and disbelief etched on every face. Even those who barely knew the family came to pay respects. A framed photo of the four Caldwells together, a smiling portrait taken during a church picnic, sat near the caskets, an unbearable reminder of what had been lost. Jerome's name was not mentioned during the service. The pain was too deep, the betrayal too fresh. While the community mourned, investigators turned their attention back to Renee Harper. After Jerome's body was found, evidence from her apartment and phone suggested she wasn't as innocent as she claimed. In several text messages, she had pressured him to fix things and make a clean start. Prosecutors argued that her manipulation had fueled his mental decline and pushed him toward violence. The district attorney charged her with conspiracy to commit murder, arguing that although she didn't pull the trigger, she had played a crucial role in the events leading up to the tragedy. During the trial, Renee appeared emotionless, her eyes often blank as witnesses described her relationship with Jerome. Former choir members testified about how her attitude changed in the months before the killings, how she became possessive, jealous, and unpredictable. The prosecution presented love letters she had written to Jerome, some filled with pleas, others laced with anger. In one she wrote, "You'll never truly be mine until she's gone." That line alone sent chills through the courtroom. The defense argued she was guilty only of loving the wrong man, claiming Jerome acted alone out of guilt and desperation. But the jury saw something darker in her actions, a pattern of emotional control and obsession that had spiraled out of control. After 2 weeks of testimony, Renee was convicted of conspiracy and sentenced to 25 years in prison. As she was led out of the courtroom, she showed no remorse, staring straight ahead with the same calm expression she once wore while directing the church choir. The verdict brought little comfort to those left behind. The tragedy had already destroyed too much: the family, the church, and the faith of an entire community. Years later, the Caldwell house still stands empty on Pinewood Lane, its windows boarded, its garden overgrown. Neighbors say they sometimes hear faint music coming from inside, like a piano being played softly in the night. Others avoid walking past it altogether, calling it cursed ground. St. Matthew's eventually reopened under new leadership, but the memory of Pastor Jerome Caldwell lingers like a shadow no sermon can erase. His story remains a chilling reminder that even the most trusted souls can harbor the darkest sins, and that sometimes evil wears the mask of righteousness.